the title of the bill.
H.R. 306, a bill to direct the Secretary of the Interior to conduct a special resource study of the site of the Kettle Creek battlefield in Wilkes County, Georgia, and adjacent property, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case, and the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Hawaii is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 306, the Kettle Creek Battlefield Survey Act, introduced by our colleague, Representative Jody Hice. This bill would require the Secretary of the Interior to conduct a reconnaissance survey of the Kettle Creek battlefield in Wilkes County, Georgia. On February 14, 1779, at the Battle of Kettle Creek, approximately 350 patriots defeated more than 800 British loyalists in a surprise attack. The battle marked the only significant victory in Georgia by forces opposed to British rule and impacted the course of the American Revolutionary War. In 1975, the battlefield was added to the National Register of Historic Places to protect the site's historic and archaeological resources. This bill tasks the National Park Service with determining the best management options for these historic resources, and I would like to thank Representative Hice for his efforts on this bill. I urge my colleagues to support its adoption, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Hawaii reserves. Gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, is recognized.
Thank you. And at this time, I yield as much time as she shall consume to the gentleman who is the sponsor of this bill, this study, Mr. Hice.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the Speaker, and I am grateful for the bipartisan support for this bill, and I want to say a special thank you to the ranking member, Mr. Bishop. It's been an honor to serve under you, both as you being the ranking member and the chairman of this committee. Your leadership will be greatly missed, and it's been an honor to serve with you and under your leadership, and I wish you the best in the years to come. I think many of us, most Americans, are very familiar with great military moments in our nation's past, in our history, and all of us could name different places where some of those memorable battles occurred. But many of the nation's finest moments took place right here in our own backyard, and many people are not even aware of some of those battles. One of those took place in the other Washington, Georgia, in Wilkes County. And as briefly was described, in February 14, 1779, there was a sizable force of British loyalists who collided with a small but ferocious band of American patriots. They were led by Colonel Andrew Pickens in the Kettle Creek area. They were outnumbered 2 to 1. Colonel Pickens and his men suddenly attacked the Tory militia, catching them by surprise. It was a bloody battle, a severe battle, a brutal fight, but it ended up being one of the greatest victories in the Southern campaign during the Revolutionary time. This battle involved only a few hundred men, but the impact is enormous on the entire Revolutionary War. In fact, Colonel Pickens himself later said of the Battle of Kettle Creek, quote, "I believe it was the severest check and chastisement the Tories ever received in South Carolina or Georgia," end quote. This engagement demonstrated conclusively that while the British could hold areas and cities like Savannah or Charleston, they could never grasp hold of the southern back country. The courage shown by the outnumbered patriots is nothing shy of absolutely legendary, and they are still honored in Georgia today. One of those stories that I'd like to share today is an individual named Austin Dabney. Despite being a slave, Mr. Dabney served with honor and distinction in the Patriot military until he was shot in the thigh in the Battle of Kettle Creek. And though crippled, he returned to servitude, and Mr. Dabney's actions were never forgotten. In fact, after the war in 1786, an official act of the Georgia legislature emancipated Mr. Dabney, and they granted him both land and a lifetime pension. And this only scratches the surface of Mr. Dabney's story, and yet it's something that we need never to forget. Kettle Creek was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1975, and the 2007 report to Congress by the American Battlefield Protection Program of the National Park Service noted the Battle of Kettle Creek as having demonstrable influence on the course, conduct, and results of the Revolutionary War. So Congress has made this significant stride in preserving many of the battlefields of the Civil War, but unfortunately, I think many of the battlefields of the Revolutionary War have been forgotten, and we need to remember those. And so this legislation is critical not only to preserving Kettle Creek, which has, by the way, tremendous support in the community and the state, but I strongly believe that the stories of both Colonel Pickens and the incredible stories of people like Austin Dabney are worth saving. They're worth saving for generations to come. And so I look forward to Kettle Creek being studied for inclusion in the park system. I appreciate my colleagues' support for this and urge the rest of our colleagues to support this piece of history and this legislation. And with that, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman from Georgia, yield.